Now, that's the language that most of us don't like as much, which is the language of transformation. The mystics really dive into it, sometimes with an excitement that embarrasses the rest of us. They do a proactive move into the cross, into suffering. They do not deny the dark side of anything, because they realize if we grab it first, then it can't grab us. That's it, in a word. If we move right into it without any fear, then there's nothing to be afraid of. Do you follow that? That, brothers and sisters, is why the mystics talk so much about suffering and death. I know to our 21st century minds, that sounds morbid, it sounds negative, it sounds, oh, come on, you know? But when you see that that's constantly paralleled by this intense joy, then it all starts to make sense. So here's the way I'm going to try to explain this. And it might seem like it isn't explaining it, but stay with me if you can. You can. I'm sure you can. To create our mental ego, our false self, there are 4 splits that the mind goes through. Everybody does it. You've done it. I've done it. And in the experience of death and suffering, what's happening is those 4 splits are overcome. A lot of us put it off till our deathbed. A lot of people don't get this till the last hours or days of life. Most people do get it at the very, very end. But I'm going to very simply describe the 4 splits for you and show you how we all get it at death. But the mystics and people like Francis, they got it real early. They overcame the splits ahead of time. And here are the 4 splits. First thing we split from, and a little child is already doing this, is myself from yourself. I'm over here and you're over there. We would call that dualistic consciousness. We live with it for the rest of our days. In the first half of life, we spend most of our time, many people do in the second too, just accentuating, accessorizing that separate self. This is me, that's you. All right, and what I do is dress this up, and I'm better than you, I'm smarter than you, I'm better looking than you, I'm healthier than you, I'm whatever. It's all about you. You know? Well, you can see why that split has to go, but for many people it's put off till the very end. We choose to over-identify with our separate self. The modern word we use for that is ego. I as separate from you. The second split, and they say children come to it, they can't really even absorb it much before, I'm told, 3 or 4, when they first encounter death. Maybe of their dog, maybe even of a grandparent. But it just apparently boggles the mind at the beginning. There are things that could live that are gone, and they're gone forever. And so we split from this possibility. We separate life from death. That's the second split. And Ernest Becker's book, The Denial of Death, which I've often said is one of the 5 most influential books I ever read in my whole life, won the Pulitzer Prize back in the 70s. Becker says that he believes the denial of death creates human culture. I mean, that is a strong statement. Everything, and he just goes through everything, is trying to pretend that I'm going to live forever. The overcoming of the split, that life and death are not 2, but 1. Everything in your mental ego says that's not true. I start the new book with that very quote, you know, that life and death cannot be 2, they are 1. Which is why you see, once you get this, you're not afraid of death anymore. You really aren't. There's nothing to be afraid of. The only people who are afraid of death are the people who haven't walked through it ahead of time. Francis says in one place, face the first death, and the second death can do you no harm. So what he calls poverty, humility, suffering, diving right into death, identifying with the lepers and the poor, he's identifying with the first death. And so once you've walked through it and you come out the other side even more alive, you're not afraid of death anymore. But most of us don't get that till the final years. The second split, which we remain pretty much totally invested in, is between life and death. They are not one, they are two. The third split, and this is what contemplation seeks to primarily address, is we separate our body from our mind. And the mind is given preeminence in almost all people. It might take different cultural forms, but this little machine called the mind starts steering and judging and analyzing and fixing and controlling and dominating, trying to dominate everything. Everything. Most people think they are their thinking. And that's what contemplation came to resolve. To let you find the deeper self previous to your thinking about it. Previous to the judgments you make, the preferences you have. It doesn't matter what you think. Your thinking doesn't make it so. This is a revolutionary breakthrough. Now, most people, that might be one of the very last that dies, right on the deathbed. It's almost foretold in people with dementia and you know, people even with mental illness, or people with Alzheimer's. They're clearly still people who deserve reverence and the image of God, and yet the mind is gone. That should be telling us you are not your mind, and your mind doesn't make you a human. You are something bigger than you're thinking about it. Or little children with mental handicaps or Down syndrome. There it's perhaps easier for us to see. We can see the divine image in them for some reason so easily. Almost because, isn't it strange, they're not their minds. And will forgive anything they do. It's okay, it's okay. He doesn't understand, he doesn't understand. And because he doesn't understand, we see almost a purer image of God. Isn't that interesting? But it reflects this third split, body from mind. And I'm sure so many of the problems we have with addiction, with obesity, with anorexia, they're all this rejection of the body, this feeling the body is not good, the body is not holy. I'm sure sexual addiction too is just the body trying to compensate, feeling so unloved, so disconnected. So it tries to connect in false self ways that don't really work. But there's no point in hating it, which Jesus never does. It's very interesting that Jesus has tremendous sympathy for what we later called the sins of the flesh. Jesus is only hard on what we call the sins of the spirit: arrogance, pride, hypocrisy. These are the sins that really destroy the soul. And yet, in our dualism, most of Christian history put the emphasis not on the sins of the spirit. You could be arrogant. I'm not trying to be negative, but you could be arrogant and be a minister, right? You could be proud and vain and be a bishop or a pope, and I'm just being honest, all right? But you better not be sexual. That does you in. Then you're unworthy. Just go back to Jesus and you don't see that. He's not localizing sin in the material universe. Sins of the flesh are sins of weakness, sins of the spirit and the mind. These are the sins that really separate you from God and from all four of the splits, actually. And the final split is the one that probably we've learned to describe better in the last century or so. The split of the acceptable self from the unacceptable self. Now we use the terms persona and shadow. And what we try to do is identify with an idealized, acceptable image of ourselves. We all do. Nothing wrong with it. What's going to work in my group, right? What is going to sell in America? What's going to sell in white culture? Why wouldn't you? So you identify with what your group says is admirable. Now, I say those are overcome in death, all four of those splits. What we see Francis doing is overcoming those four splits almost in reverse order, which is apparently the proper way. The first thing he does, and we see this in the Franciscan mystics, is there is no idealization of the self. And that became an identification instead with the poor, with the marginalized, with those on the edge, not those on the top. You've seen, perhaps you've seen my name written, it has OFM after it. That's the Order of Friars Minor. And he wanted us he didn't call us Franciscans, that was called later, after he was dead. But he called us the minor order because we were always to identify with the lower class, not the upper class. Do you see how immediately it had political, social implications? Immediately. Once God is found at the bottom, not at the top, and you stop idealizing the top, to put it most frankly, your politics changes too, right? Your economics changes too. Your identification with your place in society is very, very different. So Francis says at one point, his habit was much more patched than mine is. I don't think mine has any patches. But he said, I've got to wear patches on the outside to let everybody know what I'm like on the inside. Now that's the facing of the shadow. And there's no disguising that I'm a weak person. And I don't want you to think I'm better than I really am. One time he's walking through a little village in Italy, and all the people, this is the last year of his life, and they're praising him. He has the wounds at this point, and calling him a saint. And so he hires a little man to walk next to his donkey. And he says, every time someone says something good about me, you say something bad, right? He loved, these dramas. He'd love to create dramas to remind himself of the truth. The second split, the mind from the body, probably in some ways was easier for him because he wasn't an intellectual. In fact, in some ways, he had a bit of anti-intellectualism. In a few weeks, we'll be in Assisi, and down below on the plain where the Church of St. Mary of the Angels is, there's a little ruined church underneath the church. And when he went off to somewhere for his Lenten hermitage or something, he came back to town, and the friars had built this nice little school where they all could be smart and learn like the Dominicans, you know? And I admit this was a little fanatic, but he runs to the top and he just starts tearing the tiles off of the roof, throwing them out. We're not to be like the Dominicans, all right? We're not to be intellectuals. So that we use that as a story of his almost anti-intellectualism, because he saw what it did to so many clergy, that they didn't touch reality anymore. They confused words with reality. Now this became, in early Franciscanism, something that was called the heresy of nominalism. William of Ockham, an English Franciscan, he taught what was later called nominalism. Nomen means words. It's now called postmodernism. And we said it already then. Ockham said, words are not reality. Words are not things. Can you see how this is all building on Francis? Don't fall in love with words. Brothers and sisters, to this day, most of our arguments and fights are your words in agreement with my words. We have burned people at the stake for heresy, for not having the right words. So the alternative orthodoxy that's emerging is orthopraxy instead of verbal orthodoxy. You understand? That lifestyle instead of just saying the right words. Are you doing it? Are you doing it? So I think that split probably wasn't that hard for Francis to overcome. The second one, the separation of life from death itself, is revealed by his just diving into poverty, as he called it. Diving into death, doing a proactive move into it so that it could not surprise him, so that it could not disappoint him, so that it could not catch him off guard. He would fall in love with it. And in fact, his metaphor for his relationship with God was the marriage to Lady Poverty. What a poet he was. What a romantic he was. Who of us would have thought? Again, if God is poor, if God is humble, then to marry God is like not to marry power and glory, but it's to marry this God who's entered into the crucifixion of everything, the pain of everything. For those of you from Santa Fe, next time you go to the Chapel of St. Francis, next to the Fine Art Museum off the plaza, look at the main painting behind the stage in Santa Fe. I don't know who had the genius to paint it in the city of Holy Faith, but there is Francis marrying Lady Poverty. And all the people who come to hear the lovely music in the church or the conference center in Santa Fe probably don't even realize that's what's being pictured on the stage. Because to us, it would almost be an absurdity. Why would anybody be wed to Lady Poverty? In other words, he met life at the bottom, at the place of humility, at the place where there was nothing to lose. So if you place yourself at the bottom where there's nothing to lose, I mean, it's just really a stroke of genius, because you're never going to be disappointed. You're never going to be upset. Reality, every moment, is what it is. When it offers me grace and abundance and beauty, Francis was the first one to enjoy it. In fact, those who've toured the different places where he prayed in Italy, it seems like he was always finding a new little place to hang out, like I did last month. But there are always these beautiful places, you know. He clearly did not love ugliness. He loved beauty. But maybe you can't really taste beauty if you don't need it too much. It's always a surprise. It's always a gift. It's always more than you expected. And so the final split that the mental ego has created, self from non-self, becomes rather easy once you overcome the other three. But it usually is the last one to die. Now, when Jesus commands us to love the enemy, to love our neighbor, he's training you in overcoming that split. What you do to another, you do to yourself. What you do to the neighbor, you do to Christ. You are one in God and one in me. So it becomes what Julian of Norwich calls oneing. It's all little by little overcoming the splits from everything. So in the end, there's just one. Now, to the outsider, they'll quickly call you pantheists, or some of the Protestants call me a universalist, you know. They didn't know the earlier tradition. It's not their fault. Huh? It's not really pantheism. It's, if you don't mind the big word again, it's panentheism, God in all things. And that's very, very different. I'm not saying I am God, but that I and the Father are one, as Jesus said. That's the whole point. There is no other point to Christianity except for you to be able to experience your unity with creation, with the neighbor, with the enemy, and with God himself. And those are done step by step. Little by little, you have to overcome the splits. Now, do you see that creates a basis for universal mysticism, right? God is not so far. God is not so transcendent. God is now humble with us, indwelling on our side, for us more than we are for ourselves. God is not found in glory, but in humility, where we're all living our oh so humble lives. It really repositions the spiritual journey. Now the goal is poverty, not perfection. Can you feel? Now the goal is cosmos, not churchiness. Now the goal is the bottom, not the top. Is it rearranging for you? This is a seismic shift in human consciousness. It could have changed history. It certainly was supposed to change Christian history. But by and large, brothers and sisters, it didn't. Because the ego, the four splits, by and large, were not overcome. And we kept idealizing the top, the powerful. Even the bishops and popes tried to dress like them and imitate them. And so for many of us, it became an anti-sign. And it became hard to recognize, does this have anything to do with the message? The medium for Francis had to be the message. The medium and the message had to be the same, or the message was lost. And if you yourself are not in love with the bottom, with the poor, with the edges, with the ordinary, with the humble, in yourself and in everything else, for Francis, you could not find God. At least the God that he met in Jesus. I hope you're catching the wonder of it all. So for me, this lays an absolute foundation for a new evangelization, because the gospel's never going to go away. We can't give up on the gospel. We just got to keep rebuilding the church, rediscovering the truth. And I think my Father Francis got very close. And why for centuries he was called an alter Christus, a new Christ, to rename the mystery. But just as it was hard to recognize it in Jesus, because we made him immediately into God that we worshiped, we pretty much did the same thing with Francis. We built the basilica and buried him in it, and undid the very message that he gave us. We all do it until and unless you've overcome the four splits. You see the difference between who you want to be and who you really are. You see the difference between your mind and your body, and start living in your embodied, ordinary self. You see the difference between yourself and other selves. And what was the second one? And you see the difference between life and death. And that life and death are one. I want to say that as you cannot have one without the other. That's the Paschal mystery. And only those people who enter deeply into death, very often, most of our life, it's in solidarity with the death of other people. I think one of the greatest spiritual losses of the modern era is the medicalizing of death and moving death into hospitals. You've got to know, in all of human history, for the most part, death happened in the home, and the family accompanied the person. Some of the best theologians on the scene today are hospice workers. It's not that they themselves have died, but they've accompanied so many other people, and they see that in the end they start overcoming all these four splits. Life and death are not two, they're one. Body and mind are not two, they're one. The mind is in the body knows. I and the brother and the sister are not separate, but one. And it's almost like we're rediscovering the best Sunday school class, the best catechism we ever had. I think, in fact, you can go to all the catechism classes you want. And if you have never walked through death, you're not orthodox. It's just words. You got it? It's just words. And I want to add to that, although I'm not emphasizing it here, but I would probably say much the same for birth. I don't think we're not supposed to be present for human births. We are. We're supposed to be there. And there's something a family knows about sacredness coming from inside, about sacredness being inherent, about the embodied being good. You separate yourself from birth and from death, and all the Bible courses in the world can't make up for it. That's what I'm saying. And I believe that's the alternative orthodoxy of Franciscan mysticism. That it goes to the beginning and the end and stays close to the earth, and stays close to the concrete, the physical, the suffering that is human life. And there, it seems that we humans know something that we just can't know in any other way. And we don't know it because a teacher taught it to us, like I'm trying to do now, and therefore we can argue with the teacher or disagree with the teacher, which is where most academia leaves you. You either like the teacher or you don't like the teacher. You agree with what they said, or like many of the emails I get, they want to, why didn't you say it this way? And of course, they're right. I could have said it that way. But what they often don't see is there's ego resistance at work there, right? You know, and we always want, why didn't he say it this way? Why did he use that word? It is what it is. I can't say it perfectly because I'm not God. And I don't have to say it perfectly. But what we do have to do is walk the journey close to the bottom. And that's Franciscan mysticism, which, like nothing else, levels the playing field, makes the gospel universally available. It's not for elites. It's not for academics. It's not for celibates. It's not for men who've been ordained or something like that. And that is what was happening. It is a gift coterminous with Christianity itself. And let me end by quoting a Jesuit, because I know we have at least one here in the crowd. And I've quoted this many times before, but Karl Rahner, who did understand inherent grace, like few in the modern era, he recognized that if Christianity does not discover that it's basically mystical Christianity, it might as well close shop. It's no alternative to anything. It's just a reflection of the larger system. And that's what we see in so much of organized Christianity. Good people, it's not their fault, but they end up reflecting the anti-immigrant attitudes, the racist attitudes, the greedy attitudes, the get-rich schemes. I mean, now it's even on mainline TV, and it's called the prosperity gospel without any apology. That for me as a Franciscan would be the other end of the spectrum. And that's how far we've gone from the gospel when we don't stay close to the bottom. For Francis, Jesus came to the bottom, and it was at the bottom of things, the inside of things, that we would always find God. So surprise of surprises, that the last place most of us would look, inside of ourselves, our deepest self, is where we find the greatest mystery. So the transcendent is no longer transcendent, but within. Let me add one further thing. It might seem philosophical, but this was both Bonaventure and Scotus. To describe being, which we all participate in, the animals and the trees and the water and the sun and the moon and the stars, all participate in the one being. They came up with three words that describe the nature of being. They were called the three transcendentals. The three transcendentals were the good, the true, and the beautiful. And here's the way they led you to experience being itself. If it's being, it will always be good. In itself, it will always be true by being itself, and it will always be beautiful to those who have eyes to see. I'm going to go one step further. Keep your thinking caps on, as the nuns used to say. But it might seem like I'm just taking you on a head trip, but it isn't. Bonaventure says that the opposite of good is not bad. The opposite of good is non-being. In other words, even the bad is enclosed inside of the good. Do you follow the logic of that? The opposite of good is not bad. The opposite of good is non-being. If it's not, it doesn't exist. The opposite of the true is not the false. The opposite of the true is non-being itself. The opposite of the beautiful is not the ugly. The opposite of the beautiful is non-being itself. Can you feel the cohesiveness that creates in this universe? Your job, and the job of Franciscan mysticism, is to discover the good and the true and the beautiful in everything. Now, that doesn't mean being Pollyanna or naive, because they counter that with the facing of the bad. That is there. But the bad is never strong enough to counteract the good. That's the belief. And that's why incarnation is inevitably and eventually resurrection. If we are the incarnate children of God, we will be the resurrected children of God. And I would think that is the final note of Franciscan spirituality. Franciscan mysticism is a kind of optimism, a kind of hope, a kind of cosmic joy that the final chapter is good, that we don't have to be afraid. And that's what allowed so much art, so much beauty, so much enjoyment. We never were identified with dour Christianity. In fact, pretty much the contrary. If you look at most wood carvings of Franciscans, they're always drinking beer, or they're cookie jars or something like that. But it's very interesting to me that we're never identified with being judgmental, dualistic, angry, critical. But somehow Francis gave us the eyes to see the foundational blessing, the foundational good, true, and beautiful, which we call the transcendentals. And once you find the good, the true, and the beautiful, then God is everywhere and cannot be circumscribed anywhere. That leaves no one in charge and everybody in charge. We all have equal access. We all have equal availability to the one mystery of a God that is all good and totally humble at the same time. So let that rearrange your mind. It will rearrange your heart. And I promise you, it will make the spiritual journey a very, very different kind of journey. Thank you. Good.
Please join me in giving Father Richard Rohr one more round of applause. Thank you.